Morant with a running start. Elevate! Oh, it dunks! Oh, my goodness! Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn. His heat is gone! Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it! A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took exception. Adams going long. Morant! Oh, he hit it! John Morant, insanity!
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Grizzlies win 4 in a row in the least convincing manner possible edition. And my name is Keith Parrish. And to discuss the Grizzlies, I'm joined by frequent contributor and Grizzlies historian, Chris Herrington. Chris, happy Tony Allen week. How are you doing?
Number 9 when you need them. I'm trying to rise to the occasion, just like Tony did.
We'll talk about Tony Allen a little bit later. Of course, the team will be retiring his jersey on Saturday night. They dropped their Tony Allen documentary last Thursday. But right now, Chris, let's talk about a winning streak. The Grizzlies beat the Utah Jazz. How about them Grizzlies?
You know, you have that one game, the OKC game before they went on the road where, they got handled. But other than that, it's just this long stretch of I think they lost, what was it, 4 in a row, or 3 or 4 in a row, 3 in a row,
yeah, 4
barely.
in a row. Yeah.
4 in a row, but one was the
Yeah.
OKC game. So they lost 3 on last second shots, and then they've won 4 in relatively close fashion. So they have mostly, other than that OKC game, it feels like they've been playing close games ever since the trade deadline, really.
Yeah.
And when you play close games, it tends to be coin flippy late, and so some you win, some you lose. Qualitatively, I don't know if there's much difference between losing on last second shots to the Knicks, Hawks, and Spurs, and then winning, by possession or 2 or 3 against the Pelicans, Mavs, Jazz, and Suns. And so, they've been sort of mucking along a little bit for a few weeks.
Yeah, you're right. Outside of the Thunder game, every game's been close for a long time now.
Even at Cleveland, after the break, which is one of the hardest places to win. That was a 6-point game. They just getting close games over and over again lately.
Yeah, they haven't had a lot of leads though. They
Right.
did hang around with the Cavs, like you said. That game, my memory of that game is wrong, where I felt like they were down by more, but they weren't. They basically were down by 8 the whole game. And
Right.
then they kind of had maybe, they got within 1 possession at the end. I was tracking this. The Grizzlies hadn't had a halftime lead. They'd had a halftime lead once in the past 12 games, and that was the Knicks game. So then on Wednesday night, they actually get up by double digits on the Jazz at halftime. This is their first double-digit halftime lead since February 11th. That's a Suns game. So a full month. We're talking before the All-Star break, since the Grizzlies had quote unquote a comfortable lead. But then they let the lead slip away. The Jazz beat them up in the third quarter. The Jazz out rebounded them, I think 17-3 in just the third quarter. And then you end up in this close game once again. I know you mentioned these are coin flip games, and also, of course, Jaren's not available. And also, of course, Santi Aldama is not available. Should we care the manner in which they've won this 4-game win streak? They've been behind in the fourth quarter in every one of them. Should we even care?
I think I find the word that I've used a lot the last few weeks in regard to the Grizzlies is the word casual. I think there have been too many games where the approach has been too casual. I think last night I used that word, on social media. They were playing 11-man rotation. It felt like they were just going to be we got a lot of guys banged up. We just came off of back-to-back. We had a back-to-back in front of us. Let's coast our way and win this game, but not try too hard to do it, And it worked. They did win the game, and they played 11-man rotation, and Ja didn't have to take, 30 shots or play 38 minutes or what have you. But it got dicey. And Taylor Jenkins in his postgame even used, I used the word casual. He used the word nonchalant himself. We were too nonchalant for a stretch of the game. And so I think they've been playing with their food a little bit in some of these games. Um, I would be more concerned if these were the outcomes and Jaron and Santi were playing, but the fact that they're not, so you can take, there's positives and negatives to take out of this recent stretch. And the fact that they're just sort of barely hanging on against some of these bad teams, that you're not able to put away the Knicks game is one thing. The Knicks are really good, but you're not able to put away the Hawks and the Spurs at home. They've also been down players in most, if not all, of these games to one degree or another. I think Ja didn't play in that Spurs game. The Hawks game, Jaren gets injured like 2 minutes in, and Ja's already not playing, and then you have Jaren out since then. Um, the positive, one of the positives you can take out of it is I think this is the best stretch, the best sustained stretch of games that Ja's played maybe all season, these last four. And so you look at it and you think about putting that job with the Jaren we've seen all season and the way Baines played lately, and like you can see the glimmer of something really good coming together in time of the playoffs. I'd sort of like to see it before the playoffs actually get here,
Yeah.
And to be less of a theoretical construct and to see it in action. And to me, another thing I've said lately is dress rehearsal playoff basketball, which is what the Knicks do from starting in game one. But it feels like the Grizzlies have been sort of just navigating the regular season all season and haven't really put like their playoff team on the floor in terms of rotation, in terms of approach, in terms of the whole thing, even still.
Yeah, I think the way Ja Morant has played, it's definitely, there's an uptick there. This is now 9 straight games scoring at least 20 points. Extending his season-long streak. Early in that streak, though, because of the close losses and because of the inefficiency, I was like, this still doesn't seem great. Also, he's always Ja kept having those terrible first halves, and then maybe he got a little bit, quote-unquote, help at halftime and did much better in the second halves. These last two, and I do think we have to credit the nonchalant defense of our opponents at times in these games, but these last two, Ja has looked like that all NBA Ja where he's getting to the rim, he's setting everybody up. So you feel a little bit better. And even like looking league wide, I mean, the important thing of getting this win, regardless of how it happened, now you're virtually in a tie with the Nuggets and the Lakers for that 2 through 4. The Rockets are still breathing down our necks. But like, I was just looking at league wide. The Grizzlies have the 5th best record in the NBA. And yet, I'm still like, I'm not sure how good we are.
There's a couple things I've looked at lately relative to trying to think about, do teams have extra gears for the playoffs or not? Yeah. And I'll write about this closer to the playoffs and update the research at that point. But there's a couple things I've looked at that both sort of are pretty positive for the Grizzlies. One of those, you talk about the Nuggets. One of the things that happens in the playoffs is you lean more in terms of minutes and touches to your best players, right? And so for the Grizzlies, it's clear who the top 3 guys are. It's Ja Morant, Desmond Bain, Jarrett Jackson. For the Nuggets this season, I would say it's Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr. I would have said Aaron Gordon in the past. I think it's Porter Jr. now. I think those are their top 3 players. For the Nuggets, their top 3 players, in terms of all 3 on the floor at the same time, it's like 1,200 minutes, non-garbage time, 1,200 minutes this season. For the Grizzlies, it's under 500. In terms of just minutes per game, collect not all 3 together, but just total minutes for the 3 players over the course of a game on average, the Nuggets, it's like 15 more minutes per game, like than those guys. And you can apply that not to every team in the West mix, but a lot of teams in the West mix, and see that the room for leaning, there's more of a gap between how much the Grizzlies have leaned on their best guys in the regular season and how much they're likely to in the playoffs. There's much more room to elevate there for the Grizzlies than there is for the Nuggets, definitely, but for some other teams as well. And that's one thing where I look at it and say, these teams have the same record, and like their top 3 guys have been on the floor together 3 times as much as the Grizzlies' top 3 guys. Yeah. As much as we grumble about the Grizzlies underperforming in some ways, and maybe underperforming in terms of their approach in some ways, like they still have this record with that being a fact.
Yeah. When you think about the Grizzlies shortening the rotation and actually increasing minutes to their main guys to play similar to how like the Knicks and the Nuggets have been doing it, I feel like there was a time a couple of months ago or even a month ago where we were like, man, how do you trim down this rotation? You got to find minutes for X player. Now, and maybe it's just being super picky over like the last 2 weeks, Now it's like, I've shortened my list to about 7.
Right.
Where I'm no longer going to be mad anymore. And actually, like, specifically those people. Now, this is going to be painful for the big Vince Williams Jr. fans, the G.G. Jackson fans, maybe even the Zach Edey fans. Like, those guys are not on my must play list. They're just not.
Yeah, Vince should be, but the way he's just not 100% right now. And it's
Yeah.
when you watch him play, it's clear he's not. And so I would agree. I mean, I think it's Josh Arendez. I think it's Brandon Clark. If he is healthy, to me, that's a little bit of a concern right now. It's Santi Aldama. Those 5 are locks for your playoff rotation. I would say unless he is played out of it, I think Luke Kennard and Jalen Wells start that way as locks in your playoff rotation. So that's 7.
Those were my 7. Those were my 7 right there.
I think it's been notable to me, the reemergence of Scottie Pippen Jr.
Yeah, he's been great.
So I sort of feel like he's your 8. And I think Vince Williams is probably your 9, but maybe not. He's got to get better. And I think Edey is situational, and it's very possible it becomes he doesn't play at all, depending on the series. But, he's either like a spot minute guy. It could even be starting and playing spot minutes, honestly, or he could just be out of the mix completely, depending on the matchup and depending on how he's playing.
Yeah. I mean, poor Vince can't make a shot, which is that
is not my concern. I mean, that is a concern.
Yeah.
My concern is he is not. There was a play in the game last night. I think it was the third quarter. There's a loose ball on the sideline.
Mm-hmm.
He is the closest guy to it. He's got 1 step on a Jazz player. And the muscle memory of watching Vince Williams play is like he's going to leap out like a frog snatching a fly and get that ball.
Uh-huh.
And he hesitated. He still did get it, but he hesitated a split second. And I think that is a physical hesitation. That is I don't know if his feet and his ankles and whatever are going to allow him to make the quick reactive movements laterally or vertically in the way that he did at peak level. And the shooting's bad. I wish he were making more. I wish he were taking less.
Yeah.
But it's the lack of the, springing out of nowhere into plays that's not happening right now. And I think that's got to be entirely physical with him. He even said at a shoot around, I think a week ago, he was asked, where he was physically. And he said, I'm about 80%.
Right.
And it looks that way.
Yeah. That's a good observation. I don't remember this loose ball play where he's not making exactly the amount of awesome. Like
there was a play, I think it was either the Hawks or the Spurs game at home last week. There was a play where there was a backdoor cut to a man he was guarding. A guy cuts backdoor and there's a bounce pass and he reaches back. And I had the same reflex, like from watching the play. Oh, Vince is about to swipe that ball. And he was like an inch short on it. And to me, it's like that kind of stuff that's just not all the way there right now.
He also, this is the play that stuck out to me from the Jazz game. He also, it feels like at times, is moving so helter-skelter, perhaps. It contributes maybe to the nonchalantness. Like he had one play where I think he got the rebound and then his outlet pass was intercepted. He ended up stealing the ball back, or he knocked the ball back and the Grizzlies scored it, but it was like a great microcosm of like, that's sort of the Vince I remember.
Right.
Outside of it was the trick or treat, but it was the trick came first. And then he at least made up for it by knocking the ball away. Yeah. Like when I shortened the rotation, sorry, it was like just you mentioned Scottie Pippen Jr. They've had to play him. And because of that, we had the smallest lineups ever. Yeah, against the Jazz, where it's like
they're playing 4 guards, like 4 real guards, like not Jalen Wells, not Vince Williams.
4 real guards with a Brandon Clark at center, and it was like, and because of that, like I mean, again, Scottie in this winning streak in these 4 games, Scottie has been the one guy consistently who seems to have that spark when he checks in. You're like, oh, this guy's making things happen. By the way, Scottie had 4 steals. The Grizzlies got 15 steals as a team. Scottie had 4 steals against the Jazz, his 5th straight game with at least 2 steals. Here's a fun throwback. He joins DeAnthony Melton, Shelvin Mack, Mario Chalmers, and Nick Kalathis as the only players in franchise history with 5 straight games, 2 or more steals coming off the bench.
It was really notable to me if you go back to the OKC game at home that they lost. That's a team, obviously, that's the best defense in the league this season, number 1 seed in the West. Everybody's good. Defensively, everyone they put on the floor is good, right?
Yeah.
And it was notable to me, and it's only one game. And like Luke Kennard can get hot, like he did against the Jazz and starts making shots, right? But it was notable to me in that game how much more at home Pippen looked in that game than Kennard looked in that game in terms of being able to get to the level in terms of the athleticism and the defensive tenacity that the Thunder were putting on the floor. And Pippen was sort of be able to hang in that game athletically and competitively in a way that I found notable.
Yeah, the Kennard one's interesting. I haven't looked this up. I feel like maybe this is not supported by evidence. I feel like Luke lights up horrible teams, which is what happened in the Jazz game. So Luke, of course, was the hero, one of the heroes. 30 points, matching his career high, made 7 3-pointers off the bench, had the go-ahead 3 that rolled around the rim several times in a delightful and tantalizing way. I'm looking at his best games this year. It's against the Pelicans, the Hornets. He did show up for with 22 against the Rockets, 19 against the Cavs. That's pretty good. But like, maybe you mentioned just the physicality of a team like OKC. Pippen fits in a little bit better. But when we go back to that shortening the rotation, Kennard consistently has, at least he's been there. He's a veteran. Yeah. And right now the trust level compared to like a Jalen Wells or Gigi Jackson, who once again, nowhere to be seen in the fourth quarter. Vince Williams Jr.
Gigi got yanked for a bad defensive play. Like that was a reactive, you got yanked in the game. And we've seen that a lot over the years, different players. And Taylor even talked about it a little bit after the game, but that was a specifically like there's one play that set Taylor off and he was done for the night kind of thing.
Chris, let's take a break and then we'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about the game. Also want to ask you some questions about the Tony Allen documentary. All right, I guess actually we can go to Lamar Steven, who did play a role, was one of the 11 players to get in the game. The Grizzlies announced earlier today they've signed Lamar Steven for the rest of the season. What are your thoughts on this decision?
I didn't see anyone else out there. They were gonna, to me, the only way they weren't gonna do that is if they thought they would rather have Cam Spencer available in the playoffs than Lamar Stevens, because Spencer as the two-way would not be eligible. I didn't think they were going to make that decision, nor did I think they should make that decision, and they did not. Stevens is interesting in that I don't think anyone's going to plan for him to be in a playoff rotation, but he's the kind of guy I can see. If you ask me of like all the guys like at the bottom third of the Grizzlies roster, who's going to look up and suddenly they're playing 18 minutes in a random playoff game for some specific reason, like he would be the guy I would guess. Because his ability to match up physically with certain like bigger scorers. If you imagine like if they find themselves in a series with the Lakers, you're having to guard LeBron and Luka, or you're in a series with Minnesota trying to guard Anthony Edwards, or a series with the Clippers trying to guard Kawhi Leonard, and there's some game, you're middle of game 3 and like no one can handle that guy and you want to throw a changeup at him, Lamar Stevens is not a bad option just to throw out there and say, go be physical with that guy. And that's not really something the Grizzlies otherwise have on their roster in terms of a perimeter defender who's got some size, has some strength, has some tenacity, and enough experience that you can just throw him in a game and then be physical for 5 minutes with somebody like that.
Yeah, I think Lamar, you make good points there. I agree with him. Absolutely. Lamar also just provides that extra. I mean, he's a veteran compared to a lot of the other guys. He's at least, he's been a professional basketball player for longer. And he has, of course, that tenacity, that effort that we love. We can see that when he plays. My only pullback would be wondering, I mean, hopefully you're healthy in your front court, but like, I mean, if Jaren's hurt, nothing matters anyways. They're not going anywhere. But like, if you're missing any of your big guys, it becomes apparent how they don't fit, like these games where Jaren and Santi are out, you're like, they're like, well, we can't play Brandon Clark with Zach Edey. And those are our only two bigs. And because of that,
you're not playing Bagley with Edey. You're not playing Bagley with Clark, and
you're not playing Bagley at all.
Right.
So like that part of it where I'm like, but again, who else is out there that you're going to say this guy could fill in, and make it more of your bigs playable somehow.
Right. No, I think you'll lean into small ball in those situations, which is what they've been doing. And you have a guy like Stevens who could like guard up and guard a four, and I mean, you throw in Vince Williams in those situations, which I think is added to the problem with him in terms of his minutes. He's out there basically guarding Lauri Markkanen, in possessions
Yeah.
and giving up 5 or 6 inches in that.
That's what it says. I was laughing at this. Like I finally added up the all-time net rating of when Luke Kennard and Desmond Bane and John Morant are all on the court together. And it's like 340 possessions and they have a plus 39 net rating. And then I'm watching the Jazz game and I'm like, is Taylor Jenkins trying to just destroy this preposterous net rating? Because it's those 3 guys. It's Ja, Desmond, and Luke with like Vince and Brandon Clark, or with Jay Huff. I think what was Jay Huff and Lamar Stevens. And you're like, what's going on? But of course they have to go small ball. Also, going back, one more thing about the Cam Spencer decision. So Cam Spencer does not get in after his career game against the Jazz. The decision to not give Cam Spencer that final roster spot, to do that, they would have signed him to a multi-year deal. Personally,
with team options, that's the way they've done this repeatedly with guys, right?
I know, but still, I'm more than comfortable not being like, all right, there's our 15th roster player for next year. We have Jay Huff and we have Cam Spencer. It's like, maybe chill out a little bit.
No, I agree. That's why I'm saying that was the right decision. I'm glad they did not do that.
Yes. Yeah.
I think I think it's fine to have Cam Spencer. He's on a multi-year 2-way deal, so I think it's great to come back with Cam Spencer on a 2-way next season, and then see where it goes. Maybe he earns his way onto the roster within next season, but I don't think they need to be in a rush on that at all. It is not clear that he's a real NBA player. He might be. He might be. He has some very good attributes, but it's not clear at this point.
That's where that also, I mean, we don't have to get too much into it, but even like Jay Huff, who provided, he made a 3 in this game against the Jazz. He had a real good game in the previous game against the Suns. Like Jay Huff, early in the year, he was
good at New Orleans.
Yeah.
I was at that game.
Yeah. Like they're, that's a guy who we were so thrilled when they gave him that multi-year contract. And then for like a month, he was getting DMPs, and you're like, I don't know, does this guy need a roster spot? Was he not going to be available next year on a 2-way? Anyways, regardless, what are your expectations this weekend? And what have you heard? Because you're in Memphis. Have you heard anything more about Jaren Jackson Jr. and Santi Aldama's availability coming up either this weekend or early next week?
We're strictly in the realm of context clues on these guys, but I can give you some context clues.
Yes.
I'm in Memphis now, but I was in New Orleans and I was in Dallas on the road trip. And in Dallas, shoot around in Dallas, the morning of the game, Jaren stayed after shoot around and did one-on-one shooting, dribbling stuff with an assistant coach, basically like players do before a game, right? And this was close to a week ago at this point. And he was out there. There was no boot. He hasn't had a boot in any of this. He had his ankle lightly bandaged, and he was dribbling, he was shooting, he was doing stuff. I took that as a very positive sign for him. And then in New Orleans, I think it was either before or after the game, Taylor Jenkins got asked a question from a local New Orleans reporter about sort of the way his defense has functioned without Jaren. And in the context of the answer, like, he didn't need to say this. He just said in the context of the answer, blah, 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 blah. And then when we get Jaren back, hopefully sooner rather than later, blah, blah, blah. So he volunteered some optimism there. I think Jaren is in pretty good shape. I don't know when he will be back. I don't think this ankle injury is going to keep him from the 65 games. Now, if he comes back without room to spare and something else happens, that's where you get into dangerous territory. But I think he'll be back in plenty of time for that. I don't think he would play this weekend. I would be surprised. Like, I would set the over-under for Jaren Jackson games played this weekend at 0.5, and I would take the under.
Okay.
So, like, it wouldn't shock me if he showed up on Saturday and that was his first game back, but I'm not anticipating that at all.
Yeah.
In terms of Santi, he was out with calf soreness and he participated in shoot around in Dallas. They made him active for that game. He played about 20 minutes. It wasn't feeling right, and then they didn't play him down the stretch. And now he's been out since then. And Taylor Jenkins basically said, we're going to take another look at this. I think the team was going to be very careful with Santi.
Gotcha. One more question about the Jazz game. No Marvin Bagley, which is not stunning, but I did feel like Marvin Bagley showed some stuff against the Suns, specifically being that alley-oop threat. lob finisher that it feels like this team sort of desperately needs. Were you surprised at all that he didn't get a chance to play again against the Jazz?
No, I mean, they just got so many, even though they went 11 deep. I mean, they got a lot of guys.
Yeah, they played everybody.
If you go back to the game at Dallas in the fourth quarter where the Grizzlies sort of pulled that out, there were two alley-oop lob plays there that Brandon Clark didn't finish.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was because he didn't feel comfortable dunking. And I do think that Marvin Bagley, and this is not like faint praise, I think this is a real skill that matters for the Grizzlies as long as you have John Moran on your team. I think it is one of the things that sort of made Zaire Williams playable sometimes, is that if you can catch and finish plays above the rim, you can sort of be a weapon for John Morant. And I think that does matter. I think he's probably the best lob threat on the team, all things considered, given that Brandon Clark is, not quite what he was and not quite comfortable. It seems like, going up and really hammering plays home. So that matters, but it only matters sort of so much. I do think it was notable in that Suns game when Huff and Bagley both played kind of pretty well, that down the stretch, the Grizzlies coaches went with Bagley. Mm-hmm. I think that was a signal that, it's a choice between maybe lackluster options, but they did seem to be more comfortable with Bagley defensively down the stretch of that game than Huff. And so, to me, Marvin Bagley will be on a roster next season. He'll probably be a fifth big on a roster. No one's going to sign him to certainly to start.
Yep.
And probably on a relatively small contract. It'd be perfectly reasonable for him to be that for the Grizzlies, but I don't, to me, you don't make plans for your 13th, 14th spot right now.
Yeah, of course not. Anyways, all right. So let's talk briefly about this Tony Allen documentary. I'll keep it vaguely spoiler free. But of course, if you lived through it, there's not that many things to be spoiled. But also, if you haven't watched it and want absolutely no spoilers, feel free to turn off the episode now. I'm curious, just as someone like you who was so close to the whole thing and of course loves Tony Allen, what did you think, or was there anything in the documentary that you were surprised maybe, or that wasn't in there, or that you wish you heard more about?
Well, I'm in the documentary.
I'll tell you right now, I wish there was more Chris Herrington in the documentary.
There we go. I don't, my lifelong dream of co-starring, being a teammate of Kevin Garnett's, that happened in the doc. The stuff that documentary goes into non-Memphis stuff more than the Zach Randolph or the Marcus All did. Now, the Marcus All, got a lot of Memphis stuff before he was a Grizzly because of the family, but it was still mostly like, Memphis related stuff. And the Tony Allen, you go deep into growing up in Chicago. Yeah. You go deep into his sort of wayward college experience and then the Celtic stuff. So I would say that the growing up in Chicago stuff, like I didn't know he grew up in the same housing projects that Juwan Howard had come up in.
Yeah,
like I didn't know that at all. And so some of that stuff to me was the most surprising, more so than the stuff, about his Grizzlies tenure.
The one thing that really surprised me is, or that I wish maybe there was more of, or that it was even framed a little differently, was when his dad shows up. That seemed like a unplanned surprise, is how I interpret it from the movie.
Apparently it was, but apparently his dad, and Tony's talked about this, his dad is a former addict.
Yeah.
Who is now working for a nonprofit that helps other former addicts.
Yes.
And apparently he does his work in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So maybe his dad is just in that neighborhood every day,
right?
Because that's where he works.
Yeah.
But it apparently was unplanned.
Yeah, I could have used that moment being built up even more. Like what? But anyways, I gotta say, as someone who, I don't know what's the right word. Like when I think about the grit and grind era, and when we try to assign credit to things and we say like, oh, Chris Wallace built the grit and grind team, but then there's an entire argument of like, how much of it was just happenstance or accidental? Like how much of it was Xavier Henry getting hurt and then OJ Mayo getting in a fight and now Tony Allen's playing? Did they really know Zebo would be this reclamation project? And so you could probably pick apart any NBA success with this kind of that prism. But I wanted more about how Tony Allen wasn't playing. They did mention it, like Tony Allen was riding the bench for a while there. I needed more about how he actually got, they finally trusted him to play. And I needed to hear from OJ Mayo, but it's not surprising OJ was not in the documentary.
Well, if your listeners want more on all that stuff, I invite them to go to thedailymemphian.com.
Oh, nice.
There are subscriber only articles. I think you have to subscribe, but it's a good reason to. I have two big stories on Tony this week. If two makes a series, it's a series called The Birth of Grit and Grind. They are both built around games, individual games from his first season with the Grizzlies, but they're not just about the games. I use those games as sort of a trampoline to jump off into other aspects. And the first one, which is about what at the time, the next day, I called the Tony Allen game in
Yeah.
January of 2011 at home, is the game. It's the first game after the plane ride back from Los Angeles and where he had the altercation with OJ Mayo. And it's about that game, and it uses that game to tell a little bit of the story of the rocky first few months that Tony had, how his breakthrough almost never happened, how it could have gotten sidetracked by the fight with OJ, and then to get into sort of the trick or treat, yes, no, 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 yes quality to his game in a way that, not only Lionel Hollins, but teammates had to sort of get accustomed to. And then that came out yesterday as we speak. And then the second part of the story, the second story I did related is about, the grit grind game, the game where he does that on the sideline.
Yeah.
But I used that to jump off into stuff about his personality, how his personality came through on and off the floor, and about how we think about that game as the birth of grit and grind. I make the case that the earlier game was the real birth of grit and grind. Tony just hadn't filled out the name on the birth certificate yet. But
Yeah.
that second game was actually the birth of what became the core four.
Yeah.
If you go back in history, that game, the All Heart Grit Grind game, is the first game in Grizzlies history that the team won with Tony Allen, Zach Randolph, Mike Conley, and Marcus All as the four best players on the floor.
Oh, I like that. And also, my memory of the situation, I remember where I watched that game. That game was like a big time moment of like, I'm like, this guy's amazing. That's who, like, I like how he plays. But I think it's interesting. And of course you can't cover all this stuff in a 100-minute long documentary. My memory of it, and I don't know if it's even accurate. My memory of it is, though, we were still like, there were still years where the fan base wasn't like on board with Tony Allen closing every game. There were there were pockets of people who were like, oh yeah, Tony Allen's awesome. But my memory is people were like, why is Tony Allen out there? He can't shoot.
The trick or treat aspect of Tony's game didn't disappear. No, it disappeared that one night. It was pretty much all treats the night of the grit and grind game.
Yeah.
But the trick or treat aspect of his game and the idea that, but I talked to Mike Conley. I interviewed a lot of people for these stories. Mike Conley, Lionel Hollins, Zach Randolph, long conversation with Tony. And when I talked to Mike about it a few weeks ago, one of the things we talked about was that, Tony and Mike were sort of opposites in that way. And that Mike Conley, once he reached a certain level of his career, now he had his own stuttering early years, but once he reached a certain level, he was a guy who was basically like good at everything to some degree, sort of reliable across the board. And Tony was the exact opposite. He was the classic, he puts a lot of things on the table and he takes a lot of things off the table.
Yeah.
And you have to sort of learn to live with that and learn to manage it and reach a point where you decide that what he adds is greater than what he removes. But that wasn't the case every game or every moment. That's certainly the case. And the thing about Tony as being a part of the core four, and I write about how that grit grind game was sort of the seed for the core four because OJ was out, Rudy was out. It was really the first time those four guys had won a game together.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the fan base conception of the quote unquote core four came later, maybe a lot later.
Yeah.
Because my cover story for the following season, when you fast forward to fall, maybe even winter because there was the lockout, but it was heading into the 2011-2012 season, the next season. The cover for my cover story for the Memphis Flyer at the time, we were doing illustrated covers, and a lot of them were based on comic books. Our illustrator Greg Cravens did a great job, but we did a cover that was based on a Fantastic Four comic. It was called Four for the Future, and the four players we featured were Zach Randolph, Marcus All, Mike Conley, and Rudy Gay, who they just signed to a new extension that summer. So the idea of Tony as part of the quote unquote core four, that was still maybe a year away even then.
Yeah. But again, I guess they can't go that deep in there. That's what the Daily Memphian's for. You guys can go read Chris's stuff detailing some of that stuff. Anyways, if you haven't seen the documentary, it's called Tony Allen, the Grindfather, available on YouTube. And you guys can read Chris's stuff over at the Daily Memphian. Anyways, thanks everybody for listening. If you want more stuff from me, you get that at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. Chris, I'll see you in Memphis this weekend. Any other listeners are there, feel free to yell and say hi. I'm going to go there for the Friday and Saturday night games. Chris, who starts on Friday? Is Gigi Jackson going to start again against the Cleveland Cavaliers?
That's a real good question because they've either started Vince, they've started Gigi. It doesn't feel like either of those are great against the Cavs.
Yeah.
But to your point, it doesn't feel like they want to play any of the other bigs with Zach Edey. So that's a real good question. I don't know what they do.
I mean, Luke Kennard and Bane, and then is it time to? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who they start on Friday night. I am nervous about the shutdown with the Cavaliers, but anyways, it'll be a fun weekend. But if you want more from me, listeners, of course, patreon.com/fastbreak breakfast. Hope everyone has a great weekend. Talk to you soon. Go Grizz.